Okay. I'll count us down from 5. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi, I'm Lauren.
And I'm Oliver.
And you're listening to Optimism of the Will, the friendliest, queerest podcast on the left. Oliver, before we get started today, I wanted to rant a bit about optimism because that is the nature of our podcast. And the rant being, why be optimistic? Which was something I kind of had to interrogate myself over a little over these past few weeks for Lauren, because it's been a bit of a challenging time for me. And I want to read part of the transcript from Concept Point's video, Gender Critical, if I may.
I'm interested.
Quote. I'm quoting the video. Quote, I recently... oh my god. Sorry. Hold on. Let me clear my throat. I gotta remember to do vocal warm-ups before we start recording. Okay. Quote, I recently rewatched the classic viral video from an old episode of Cops where a police officer humiliates a Native American trans woman named Stephanie Yellowhair. The power-tripping cop demands to see her ID, misgenders her, dead names her, mocks her clothes and makeup, and calls her a crossdresser. It's also repetitive and familiar. It's the same arsenal of petty sadism you see in the right-wing press, on 4chan, on doxing forums, on gender-critical Reddit. It's all the same. What everyone remembers about Stephanie Yellowhair is her unbreakable wit and confidence in the face of transphobic abuse. The single most iconic moment is when, after being grilled in the back of the cop car amid a flurry of dead naming and misgendering, she glances at the cop and says, Stephanie, excuse my beauty. Officer, excuse your beauty? Okay. And that right there is the single greatest quality of trans feminine culture, the resilience of trans women, the assumption of a regal posture even in the most abject conditions. And that's really all you can do, because there's just no reasoning a transphobe out of bigotry. Unquote. So Oliver and I we're both trans people. And, you know, for all trans people, really, you know, we will be facing big challenges in life, right? And this is the nature of being a human being in the universe. You're going to get big challenges in life. And those challenges can be everywhere. They can be omnipresent. And sometimes all you can do is face those challenges with dignity. You know, Stephanie Yellowhair could have just cried and whined, and that would have been an appropriate response. But it's the response the haters would have wanted. We're going to face these big challenges in life, and we need to face them with a sense of dignity. The most undignified thing you can do is to be a doomer, to not have optimism. You know, this is how change happens, when you truly believe you're a bigger person than what your problems are. Or even if you don't, act like it until you fake it until you make it. Yeah, that's all I had to say about optimism.
I just looked it up, and somebody actually made a Wikipedia page of Stephanie Yellowhair, and she died in 2018. She was young.
Shit. Oh, I didn't know that.
She was only 41.
Oh, that's so sad. Yeah, well, rest in power, Stephanie. Oliver and I, speaking of wanting to be dignified in the face of an oppositional universe, we wanted to do an episode today about disability. I thought we could start with kind of explaining a bit about how Oliver and I are disabled, and then just kind of go from there. I've been on disability. I've been recognized as disabled by my province, the area I live in, for probably about 5 years now for officially depression, but there's a bunch of comorbid, like, mental health issues at play. You know, when I was filling out the paperwork to explain my disability, I'd have to explain, like, how much difficulty I had to take care of my daily living. Stuff
Did you
like,
give them some like real life examples of like how it affected you?
yeah, stuff like, being able to feed myself and, like, hold down jobs and cleaning my place, like, really, really basic stuff that I didn't necessarily think and didn't necessarily put into, like, a disability context before that moment. But the truth was, like, I'm not, how do I word this? I have a hard time taking care of Lauren. And it's gotten better in some ways, but this has been a very consistent problem throughout my life. And the word disability is something that, like, emotionally I've had a lot of trouble kind of accepting and identifying with, even though, like literally, like, medical professionals have looked over my disability application and be like, yeah, she's pretty disabled. But, part of me is like, oh, I'm not that disabled. I'm not, like, confined to a wheelchair or anything. And, I think that's kind of an internalized ableism just from living in society. Disability can look very different from person to person, from diagnosis to diagnosis. And it's been tough for sure. I'll let Oliver talk.
I was gonna say, whenever I had to demonstrate like some of the real life examples, and my diagnoses on paper legally are PTSD and depression.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the examples I gave them was one time I was unable to check the mail for so long that the box got totally full, like one of those apartment like lockup ones,
Yeah.
and that they stopped delivering mail. Like they thought I didn't live there anymore.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was quite a while.
How did you find out that they thought you didn't live there anymore? Did they just leave it like a notice or?
Well, it was probably like at least 6 weeks that I like didn't take any mail out of my mailbox.
Mm.
And then I was like, I should probably do something about this. So I finally took all the mail out and I
Mm-hmm.
was expecting some stuff to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And then like nothing was coming. So I had to like call the post office and they're like,
Oh,
oh, we thought you left.
I see.
Yeah. But let's see. I've been on SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, I think is what it stands for, um, since 2018.
Mm.
I applied in 2016, and it took about 2 years until I got to see a judge. And in that 2 year time period, um, it's it's not a good idea to have a job, even if you can work like a part-time job, if you're like barely capable of working. Um, a lot of the time, the judge will see you working that minimal amount as evidence that you're not disabled or not disabled enough. So a lot of the time, if you're working with an attorney for your disability case, they will discourage you from working. And so I was very, very poor through that time period. My my girlfriend was working probably about like 30 or 35 hours usually, and just like in retail, and it was very, very difficult to make ends meet for a little while there. And I feel like um, something that a lot of disabled people, I'd say like most disabled people, especially working class disabled people, experiences like abject poverty.
Did they count your partner's income against you? Because they do in Canada. Oh, they don't.
No, so in the US, there are two different um, disability incomes. One of them is called SSDI, which is the one that I'm on,
Mm-hmm.
and it is not income based. SSI, which I think is just called Social Security Insurance, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
um, that one is income based. And if you have like a certain amount of assets, so if you have a car that's like worth more than like $2,000 or something, I don't know what the income and like asset limit is exactly for SSI, but I know it's like absurdly low to the point that almost no one can qualify for it. Like you basically can't qualify for it unless you're like couch surfing or like basically homeless, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's almost nobody is on SSI unless they're like committing fraud, to be honest.
Hmm.
Um, But for SSDI, something that is still a limitation for me is that I cannot make more than, I think the income limit this year is 1450 a month before taxes.
That's not a lot.
Or yeah, it's really, like that's rent in a lot of places.
Yeah.
Um, and my SSDI income monthly is I think about it's $930 right now.
Hmm.
And the way it works in the US is that SSDI is based on your past income.
Mm-hmm.
And since I was, pretty obviously disabled before, even before I applied for I couldn't work very much. And I was kind of like always in a revolving door of different jobs, um, where I would be quitting a lot because I wouldn't be able to tolerate the stress of the work.
Mm-hmm.
I would be throwing up a lot at my jobs and dry heaving at my jobs because I was just
Hmm.
like my anxiety was so bad, and I would have attendance problems also because of depression. Um, and so I just, I didn't make very much money. And for, you might be wondering, like, okay, what if, like, you didn't have a past income? Like, what if you were never able to work previously? In that case, on your paperwork, you say that, like, you've never been able to work, and they'll give you, I'm not really sure how much income they give you, um, but it's more than what I get.
Oh.
So it's kind of strange. Um, but yeah, I don't get very much, and the thing that's like really valuable about SSDI for me is I'm on Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid is the state level
Mm-hmm.
insurance, and Medicare is the federal. And so I basically have two forms of health insurance that um, pay for almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
And since I go to so much therapy and have so many prescriptions, like if I got a job and made more than 1450, um, like losing that insurance would be like so fucking financially devastating that it's not worth it.
Absolutely. I think that touches on a bit in in kind of my experience of living under neoliberalism. There is there's a conflict of ideas within the neoliberal worldview. One is a pro-capitalist worldview, and then one is attempting to reconcile capitalism with social justice. And oftentimes this doesn't pan out, and our disability is a perfect example of that. On the one hand, you know, it's obvious to these lawmakers that like disabled people are going to have a hard time working. On the other hand, they also fundamentally believe that working is a moral virtue, that it's something that everyone should do, and that it's good for disabled people. And they try to reconcile these two ideas by saying, okay, well, we need to help these disabled people, but we also want them to work. So we're just not gonna give them enough to live on, or make it like very, very like uncomfortable just so they can scrape by. And it's a solution that like a pure capitalist wouldn't agree with. It's a solution that someone who has a cohesive social justice ideology is not going to agree with. It's fundamentally mismatched. Here in Canada, so I'm on provincial disability. PWD, persons with disabilities. It's about 1,500 Canadian a month, which that's probably like 1,200 US, something like that. It's not a whole lot, and like in your case, there's income limits, but thankfully it's like, it used to be like there was a maximum you can make a month, but now they do it by year, so you can like work full time for like a couple months or something and save up money, and as long as you make under a yearly amount, you can keep it, which I have mixed feelings about. The provinces are sorry.
I was gonna say that almost seems like harder to keep track of and harder to make work, but at the same time, it's also really difficult to
Yeah.
find a part-time job and be like, hey, I can only work this many hours. If you set that expectation,
Mm-hmm.
um, like sometimes they might ask why, or they'll try to push it. It's like,
Yeah. Well,
it's
a lot of disabled
not a
people just
winning
quit before
situation
hitting the
for us.
limit. Is the thing. Yeah. So in Canada, the provinces will handle disability, and it will vary a lot from province to province. The federal government 4 years ago campaigned on a promise saying we'll introduce a federal benefit, because we got a ton of bad press for disabled people being so poor in Canada that they choose to take medically assisted suicide instead of trying to live. Like literally, like these people, they live in abject poverty. When you're disabled, your expenses are higher than abled people. So Canada got a ton of bad international press for disabled people essentially killing themselves because they couldn't afford to live in our expensive ass country. So the Liberal Party of Canada, neoliberals, they campaigned on delivering a federal disability benefit as like a top off for the provincial disability. I was very interested in this process because I'd never really followed how like a bill becomes law in Canada before, and I followed this one very closely because I am disabled and it was a particular interest to me. And I watched them talk about it in our legislature. I watched our lawmakers listen to disability advocates. I watched these same lawmakers talk about how much they understood and how much they cared and how they were going to make this benefit work for everyone. And I very naively believed these people. if you went online, everyone was saying like, no, don't believe them. It's going to be a terrible benefit. And I was like, come on, you guys, let's, I think they're listening. I was completely wrong. They were, well, okay. The benefit came out in the summer budget, like a month or two ago. Disability advocates were saying we need around $2,000 a month from the federal government. I was kind of expecting around that range, $1,000 to $2,000, because that's what we got for COVID when they were paying people to stay home. That's what they kind of recognize as like what people needed to live, right? I'll give you a guess. How much do you think the amount they gave us was?
Oh God, they didn't give you like less than 5,000, did you? Did they? Or
They
I'm sorry, 500, less than 500.
what they gave us, what the benefit gave us. Advocates said we needed $2,000. The federal government said we'll give you $200.
Jesus Christ.
We'll give you $200, and it's tied behind the disability tax credit, which the federal government uses for income tax purposes. And the DTC rejects people all the time who apply because they just want to save money. Like, you have to apply twice on average. They just kind of expect people to give up after the first time.
That's how it is here too.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's bullshit. I hate these liberals. I hate these neoliberals so much. So much, Oliver.
Yeah, usually how it works here, even people with like terminal illnesses, they will often be rejected the first time they apply. And so, a few weeks later, you get a letter in the mail, a rejection letter, and then they're like, "But you can file an appeal if you want." And if you have depression and like psychological issues, getting that rejection letter is like so fucking like it's devastating for anybody. And
Mm-hmm.
just like the hopelessness sets in and you're like, can I actually do this? Like I'm disabled, can I afford an attorney? Luckily in the US they do have a policy where if somebody represents you in court or helps you through the disability process, that attorney can only take up to 33% of your back pay, which can be a really significant amount of money. But at least it's like if you don't win, they can't take anything from you, they can't charge you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's nice, but man, it's just awful how like there are a lot of disabled people who are not on disability. Like people are always talking about like these theoretical people who are like scamming the system, and I'm like, I don't know why you're worried about that when I see so many disabled people who are like breaking their fucking bodies and their minds
Mm-hmm.
to barely scrape by.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. According to the federal government of Canada, I'm not disabled. It's just some wild nonsense. But you're absolutely dead on with how many disabled people there are who just aren't on disability internationally. Over 1 billion people, according to the World Health Organization, are disabled. Like, anyone can become disabled, and if you live long enough, it's gonna be a thing that happens to you.
So you're on provincial disability, but not federal disability because it's only $200 a month, and like,
Yeah, and they gatekeep the
would
shit
you
out of
have
it.
to?
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to do like an appeal process and everything. I assume that like you applied one time and they rejected you. You said
No, I didn't even bother because like it costs money to apply. That's the crazy thing.
what?
Yeah, yeah, they charge you. They charge you
What is this?
to. We
How
live
much
in
do they
a.
charge?
I don't remember. I think it might have been like $200 or something. It's been a while since I last checked. It's not a fair or a just system. Before Oliver and I started the podcast, we talked a bit about disability and work. Oliver and I, we both have ADHD, I don't know about all of her, but my ADHD is like pretty freaking severe, and I find that I am in this really position of being like genuinely like pretty smart, pretty creative, and then not being able to get like work that I know I would be able to do just because it's too stressful and like the accommodations for it just aren't there.
Did you say that you also risk losing your provincial benefits if you yeah, you said that it's a yearly thing.
Yeah,
What
there's a
what is
yearly.
your income limit for a year?
I think it's like $15,000, which is like a part-time
God,
job
it's
in
so
Canada.
low. Jesus.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like you said earlier, like they try to incentivize disabled people to work, and they might try to say it's from the goodness of their hearts because they think that like working is moral and
Mm-hmm.
not working is immoral.
Mm-hmm.
But really, the reality is like we want to extract labor from this group of people. Um, and so the stick doesn't work, it's not working. I mean, I guess for some people it can, depending on your situation and like how desperate you are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like, why not the carrot? Give us the carrot.
I like
Because
carrots. Yeah.
I don't know about other people, but like, if I had more wiggle room,
Mm.
I would have more willingness to work. But in this position, it's like I can't risk working. Like I can't risk losing my disability. I can like very, very carefully work under highly specific circumstances. God, they do not make it easy to work, even if you want to, even if like you have some ability to.
Yeah, yeah. And that's from the government side, and then from the business side, from your employers, like they're ableist as heck. Capitalism is ableist as heck. Um, like I remember I used to work at a movie theater, and there would be times I'd be literally so depressed I would just miss shifts, and they'd give me write ups for it because they totally didn't or wouldn't understand. Um, I don't know. I think our civilization is in a bad place where our work. Can I read you the Stalin quote I really like? I don't like
Yes.
Stalin. I just like this one particular quote he said. Uh, free. Hold on, let me pull it up. Stalin. It is difficult for me to imagine what personal liberty is enjoyed by an unemployed, hungry person. True freedom can only be where there is no exploitation and oppression of one person by another, where there is not unemployment, and where a person is not living in fear of losing his job, his home, and his bread. That you feel so viscerally when you are disabled.
Stalin spitting.
I added that last part about the disability. That wasn't Stalin. I don't know what Stalin's views are on disability rights, but yeah. Well, I heard in the Soviet Union it was like really hard to like get fired from a job. Like it was basically impossible. So, I think I'd almost prefer that because I do just slack off a lot.
The IWW inherently considers a disabled person a worker who's eligible to join the IWW. Um,
Oh, cool.
for anybody who doesn't know what the IWW is, the Industrial Workers of the World,
Mm-hmm.
the one big union. It's you can pay a membership due and get resources. You can find a local chapter of people who are involved. I'd really say it's probably like one of the most progressive organizations in my view.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I ideologically align with the IWW more than like probably any singular group. Um, and I got my Sabo Tabby flag on the wall behind me.
Yeah.
Um, I actually met some IWW guys at like a socialist meetup recently,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's like a local Mid Missouri chapter that's possibly being formed, which I'm really excited about. Um, but I just think it's really fucking based, frankly, to say like, man, if you're a manager, sorry, like you might technically be working class, but we don't want you in the IWW. But you're disabled and you can't work or don't work.
Mm-hmm.
Hell yeah, join us. You're one of us. Like disabled people are are workers, whether or not you're working.
So based. So good. We love unions here on Optimism of the Will.
Hell yeah, we do.
Did any of the places you work at, did you find they any of them accommodated your disability? Because I find a lot of them will kind of give lip service to it, but they don't really want to accommodate it.
Yeah, it really is usually the lip service,
Mm-hmm.
honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have like any positive examples. And, in my most recent job, where I was working at a shelter for homeless youth,
Mm-hmm.
um, God, like that whole experience is like incredibly painful to me, in part because the management was so explicitly ableist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and at the end, when I got in a big situation with them,
Mm-hmm.
um, they were just using my PTSD against me
Uh.
in the conversation that we had with our biggest funder, where I was demonstrating like, hey, we kind of have a little bit of a situation here, and there's some behavior from staff that is clearly abusive toward the residents.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can do a lot better than that. I think like, the bar is in hell. Let's not abuse like some of the most vulnerable people on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and whenever I mentioned, like, hey, as somebody who has PTSD from abuse, who has experienced abject poverty and like had no choice but to live with this person who is abusing me, um, like this is what I see. It's pretty clear to me that like people in this situation are going to feel coerced to stay here, whether or not it's a good situation for them. That's just like the economic reality of being that vulnerable sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and man, whenever I brought up my PTSD, they immediately started basically saying you're just triggered, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's a you problem, you're perceiving this as abuse because you have all this baggage. I'm like, are you fucking serious? It's just like accusing me of being like delusional because I had the nerve, like I made the mistake, I guess, of being open about having PTSD with my employer, And it's like in that environment, I think personally it was exceptionally insulting because my background and my history should have been an asset in that workplace,
Mm-hmm.
where like I have a lot of knowledge and like I share a lot of experiences with the residents who were there. And instead it was just my history was used as like a weapon to downplay and dismiss any concern that I had. That really sucked. It really sucked.
That does suck, but it reminds me, kind of going back to earlier in our podcast. Um, so Oliver, after a while of putting up with all that nonsense at work, you quit on their asses. You gave their keys back, and you walked away from that organization. And I wanted to recognize that as like, this is a moment of dignity. It was Oliver realizing like, hey, I'm not gonna put up with this nonsense. Which is hard. You needed that job. You needed that income, but you walked away because you recognize your self worth. And I realize not everyone is in that position, but it's like we were talking about earlier. It's about dignity in the face of challenges. when you're a disabled person living in our capitalist hell world, you're you're gonna face those challenges, and you're gonna need to face them with dignity.
Yeah, you know, it's hard sometimes because when I'm acting in self-respect, sometimes I think like, God, am I just like being a coward, you know, like leaving? Am I being like a doomer, a quitter right now? Um, and like I guess the reality is like acting with dignity and self-respect can look a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for my coworkers who also like experienced the indignity of like being in that situation and essentially like pleading with management to give a shit and do something. Some of them stayed and they're still working to try to make the place better for the residents there. And I know for them that's claiming dignity.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, claiming dignity was walking away and saying like I'm not taking this shit from you guys. I'd
Absolutely.
say my only real regret in walking away is kind of wishing like it would have been more impactful if I was a person who could have worked more hours. You know, being disabled, I was only working 16 hours. If I had been working 40 hours or more,
Mm-hmm.
um, I just think about that potentially being like more impactful, more of like a bargaining chip being like taken from them. Um, and of course, like that's where like unions and like worker solidarity comes in.
Mm-hmm.
But man, like working and dealing with shit in the workplace when you're a minority, especially like existing at multiple intersections, like me being disabled and trans,
Mm-hmm.
it's a fucking lot sometimes.
It is a lot. Yeah, that was kind of a heavy topic.
It fucking gets heavy out here real quick when you're disabled. Okay, I remember what I wanted to ask you earlier though,
Mm.
which was you said it was kind of like you struggle with internalized ableism and also like claiming the label disabled. I think for me personally, after I was legally awarded disability income, um, after that, like it still took me a little while, but I started like gradually feeling more comfortable with that label and also spending more time in online spaces,
Mm-hmm.
um, where like people in those spaces were disabled by like PTSD and depression and like psychological stuff like me. Um, I don't know, like what has your journey looked like and what's it been like for you working with that label or that identity?
It's still a challenge at times. I think I think I'm mostly comfortable with it. Um, and I've been hanging out on more more spaces with disabled people as well. Like, um, there's a subreddit CPTSD memes I like hanging out on. Uh,
That's the one that I left recently.
yeah, yeah, I can see
Yeah.
how it can be a little triggering. Um,
I mean, it's a good space and it can be really fun
mm,
and lighthearted and silly. I mean, it's never really lighthearted because it's always like heavy stuff, but like making fun of the heavy stuff.
yeah, yeah. Like I saw this one meme. It was like it was like I forgot how it went exactly, but it was something like, uh, "Mommy, why are you mad at me? I'm 7 years old and I love you." Just I don't know, but it was totally relatable.
I think it can be hard to claim being disabled, like claiming the identity of disability, when you have CPTSD from parental abuse, especially, because I know that I've said this out loud to myself when I'm just like being an asshole to myself, but I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'll be like, oh, I have my mommy and daddy were too mean to me disorder, and that's why I can't work a job. You know what I mean? I'm just like very cruel to myself for no reason.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's I don't know, it's just so it's messed up because like when your parents are mean to you, okay, when your parents are emotionally, verbally abusive, when they're neglectful, this leaves a hole in your life where foundationally the love and support of a family should have been, and that messes up people bad. Like, if you look at like I don't know, like terrible dictators or serial killers, like very, very commonly, almost 100% really, they were some kind of abuse victim growing up. And, you know, our society doesn't really recognize that.
I think something that helps me like contextualize and understand like how serious like abuse and neglect can be whenever I'm like disparaging my own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a little meme that goes around that you might have seen that says something like animals when they're born gain like their most important survival skills like within like it's the first skill they develop, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So for baby deer, like they're standing up and able to like run away
Mm-hmm.
as quickly as possible. That's like one of their most important survival skills. I think there was also an example of like maybe like a snake is like learning to bite or something.
Mm-hmm.
But then they go to human babies and they're like, the first thing that you learn to do is cry because that is your most important survival skill as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're social creatures. We all know Kropotkin, we all know the bread book,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how we function. That's how we survive. Um, and whenever you cry as a baby and you're not attended to, like that has long-term psychological effects on a human being, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Um, I'm a big fan of Dr. Gabor Mate. He's from here in Vancouver, actually. He's like a bizarro Jordan Peterson, where like Jordan Peterson is like this cringe Canadian psychologist who's like right wing. Gabriel Mate is a progressive, cool psychologist who quotes Marx and stuff. And he's very big on connecting childhood trauma and how it expresses itself on fundamental, sometimes cellular. I can't say it, cellular level, like or epigenetics, like a lot of ADHD, for example. That's like a genetic thing, right? But it will it's more common to show up in kids who suffer abuse. Just I forget what exactly the explanation for that was, but it was something he noticed, and I thought that was super interesting.
I wonder if it might be, I don't know, we were talking a little bit about this yesterday, you and me, just talking about like emotional states being very overwhelming and like not just negative states, but positive states can be as well. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like with my ADHD, my symptoms are worse if I'm having like a really big emotional experience because that takes my attention away from like anything else I'm like thinking about or anything I'm trying to do. And I think as somebody who has PTSD, and depression. It's just like I'm prone to like very, I guess you could say, distracting emotional states where it's like I can't really pay attention to anything else right now. I can't do anything else right now. It's hard to even like remember to like keep up with things because like what I'm going through emotionally is just like so big and out of control, you know?
Hmm.
And I guess for some people, there's like, if you have more emotional regulation skills, especially at a younger age that you were able to develop like a good foundation for, then like you're gonna have more of an ability to like redirect what you're putting energy into. I wonder if it could be something like that. I'm curious about it. So you said
Yeah.
he's like written about this though?
Yeah, I'll send you. I'll send you some links after after recording. Super interesting research that I unfortunately don't remember any of right now, but I did just wake up, so cut me some slack, audience. I had to make myself a coffee before the podcast because okay, so the context is I've been basically nocturnal for a couple of weeks now, and that's fine. I don't have like a set schedule or anything, but you know, I would like to kind of be on the same page as the rest of humanity every once in a while. So I've been trying to sleep earlier, taking my vitamin D because that helps regulate your circadian rhythm. So today I woke up at like 9 in the morning, which is very early because usually I've been waking up at like 2 p.m. And I've been adapting okay, but it is an adjustment, so I'm gonna be gonna be a little out of it for a bit.
I was just looking up the Gab. I don't want to say his name incorrectly. Do you know how to say
Gaber
Gabor
Mate.
Mate?
Yeah, yeah,
Gabor Mate.
yeah.
Scattered Minds is the book that he wrote about ADHD. I don't know how old it is. Looking at it though, I think it would probably be pretty um, controversial, pretty spicy among the ADHD community and probably like the progressive community in general, which is actually something that frustrates me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm sure that we're going to catch up because I do think like progressive people, leftists are um, more interested in science and keeping up to date on what's true and what's relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think sometimes I've noticed some how do I explain this? I've noticed some resistance to the idea that psychological illness can be more social and environmental than genetic or inherent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I see that among progressives, which is actually kind of surprising, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And even whenever it comes to like identity, like queer identity or trans identity, I see that same kind of pattern. Um, but this book, just to read a little bit about it, it says demonstrates that ADD is not an inherited illness, but a reversible impairment, a developmental delay, which I think even a lot of like people in psychology would be like super up in arms about because it is right now in 2024 most people understand ADHD as like only heritable and lifelong incurable, only treatable. Um, Explains that an ADD circuits in the brain whose job is emotional self-regulation and attention control failed to develop in infancy and why. Okay, so that was the emotional regulation thing I was just talking about. Um,
Hmm.
Shows how
Okay, interesting.
tuning out and distractibility are the psychological products of life experience from in utero onwards. Yeah, I think I'd be really interested in checking this out.
Okay, yeah, I gotta check that again. Maybe I misremembered exactly what I said. But speaking of progressives and ableism, I found weirdly a lot of the ableism came from like supposedly like leftist friends of mine. Um, where like I'll try to explain like a problem I'm going through, and they'll be like, "Well, you just gotta do it and, and solve it by yourself." And it was a very like almost like right wing talking point. Like you gotta be super personally responsible, which I'm all for personal responsibility, but there's a limit to that. Um, I forgot where I was going with this.
I see a lot of eco-fascism
Yeah.
from leftists. And just to bring up the thing we were talking about before we hit record,
Mm-hmm.
the thing with the plastic, people like, okay, so here's the context. I've seen it on Mildly Infuriating, upvoted to like the heavens,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a picture of, I don't know, like watermelon or some other, no, I think there was a pre-peeled banana in
Mm-hmm.
a plastic case,
Mm-hmm.
a few bananas. And everybody's like, wow, I can't believe people are so lazy these days. And I saw from a progressive, shared an image of fruit that was pre-cut or pre-peeled, in a plastic container, and they had the meme format of capitalism breeds innovation, the innovation, and then shows the fruit. And I'm like, hey, I know you're a progressive. Like, I respect you. I don't want to fight with you, but I just want to let you know, like, this is really ableist. These products are typically for a lot of people with disabilities. Like, there are people who cannot peel their own fucking banana, dude. Like, this isn't a capitalism thing. This is a, disabled people deserve the same goddamn quality of life and the same foods that you do. They deserve the same access. And, I would hope if somebody's a progressive that they're going to say, oh shit, I didn't realize that. Thanks for letting me know. I'm going to learn a little bit more about that. And sometimes you get that response. But unfortunately, sometimes you'll find somebody who calls themselves a leftist, a socialist, whatever, and they'll start like concern trolling about, okay, but I think that disabled people, if you really cared about them, you would also care about them not getting so much microplastics in their body. Maybe you're the ableist. I'm like, are you fucking serious? Like, how could you say something like that? It's
Hmm.
absolutely infuriating. I've brought up that topic in other left-wing spaces and had people explicitly say to me, like, these actual words, where they're like, if disabled people have to die in order for us to stop climate change, then I think we're just going to have to do that. I think we're just going to have to let them die. I'm
Hmm.
like how can you actually say that, dude? And so I do think that that's pretty much like when I think of ecofascism, I think of that. And I do think it pulls in a lot of otherwise progressive people, unfortunately.
I think, um, I think that's because like ableism fundamentally like really, really runs deep into our culture. Um, I guess I can really only speak in so far as North America goes, like specifically Canada and the U.S. Um, but there is fundamentally this idea that like laziness, quote unquote, is like a sin. It's like a bad thing, and that hard work is fundamentally a virtue. You know, and to that idea, all I have to say is hard work for who? Who are we working hard for? Is it someone who owns all the means of production and then we only have our labor to sell? Because that kind of sounds like a scam to me. Um, but yeah, it's such a deeply fundamental part of our societies. There's this. I saw this on Reddit the other day. It was a social studies textbook from Ontario in like the 50s. It was like an old textbook for like high school or whatever. And it said very explicitly, didn't use any euphemisms at all. It just said white people are the hardest working, and that's why they're the most powerful people on earth.
I think I did see that.
Yeah,
Cringe.
it explicitly says that. This idea, this ableist idea of hard work, is very intrinsically tied with a right wing mindset, with fascism, with ableism.
I think ableism is kind of like the acceptable bigotry, and it
Mm-hmm.
kind of always has been, and um, it's hard to help somebody understand like when they're otherwise like aware of other kinds of bigotry, to make them aware of ableism. For some reason it's like more challenging, and I think the reason for that, I think Luxander talk about this once, and Luxander said it's like the root bigotry. Ableism is like the core bigotry, the foundation underneath other kinds of bigotry. So, like for example, whenever eugenics is being proposed on a certain demographic of people, they might say um, oh, black people need to be gotten rid of in the gene pool because like they're less intelligent, they're less like whatever else. Um, and whenever we look at the root of that, for example, like we take less intelligent as a given state of a person that is less valuable. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Um, and so I think, whenever we talk about like trans people being um, less valuable in the workplace, or less valuable socially, a lot of the time people are perceiving us as like highly emotional, um, prone to delusion, and in need of unique medical care. And these trans people especially, I think, have a lot of like intersections between, like with the disabled community. We do often have like medical needs that cis people do not have. Um, And so I do think that there is something to that with what Luxander said, that ableism is kind of just like the root bigotry. It's the thing behind all of the things.
That makes perfect sense to me. Yeah. Okay.
And
Sorry,
I
go
don't
ahead.
know, since we're the Optimism
Yeah.
of the Will podcast, I wonder like what we can do about it. But that's like a huge question, and I guess we're pretty far in to this episode, aren't we?
Well,
Over an hour.
um, like we were talking about earlier, like these these are big these are big systemic challenges, and they can feel very very overwhelming. You know, it will be very important going forward that you find community, that you find people who support each other, who want to help each other. I think foundationally humanity is based on this idea of cooperation. Um, and that for disabled people, having a community is going to be especially important. Being disabled and alone is a very frightening prospect. Like kind of like how we were talking earlier about how you were trapped in that abusive relationship because you really had nowhere else to go, right? Like this is why we need mutual support networks. This is why leftism and progressivism are so politically important, because these are fundamental aspects of human nature. Like, we need to be helping each other when and where we can. And then like we talked about earlier, the other aspect of this is being that political optimist, you know. When you're not being a doomer, when you're being like a positive force in the world, that's not only a good thing for you, it's a good thing for other people.
It's emboldening.
Yeah, yeah, to face these challenges with dignity.
I was reminded by somebody recently in my community that it's okay that right now I'm taking a break from a lot of like the activism stuff that I was doing. In part because like other people are going to pick up the work for me. That's what community is about, you know. Like we all do what we can when we're capable of doing it.
Yeah,
And
it's like when a choir sings, sometimes you need to take a break, but the rest of the choir is there to fill in.
that's fucking beautiful actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever in orchestra, because I play violin, there are times where like there will be a very very long sustained note, and you know you only have so much length of bow. Eventually you're going to run out of bow and you have to change directions. If you all change direction at the same time,
Mm.
there's going to be an obvious break in that sustained sound. So you stagger it, and
Exactly. Yes.
it's not really planned. It's
Mm.
not something that you're like, all right, you know, we're gonna go first, and you guys, you kind of just like you look at each other, and you just know what to do, you know. And there was something, man, I really loved being in orchestra, and part of it was because I felt like this oneness with people that like that this kind of like connection, a wordless connection that is like really special. But yeah, like 100% when it comes to like what do we do about this, it's community. Get involved with community, and that can be local IRL community, and that can be online community. Personally, I have both, and I started with online community long before I
Mm.
was able to start forming IRL community. And like that shit matters. Even if you're just starting with like a parasocial relationship,
Mm.
that can still matter. That can still be like rewarding and emboldening
Mm.
to an individual, having that kind of um, that positive relationship to somebody who's in your community. Yeah.
Yes, this is a fantastically positive and optimistic note to end on. Speaking of parasocial, I'm going to take a moment to plug our socials. We are Optimism of the Will. You can listen to us on Spotify, and we also have a YouTube channel. I'm trying to make iTunes work, but it's they charge you for it, so that might be that might be a ways off. We are OPT of the Will on Twitter. I'm gonna call it Twitter. I'm gonna dead name Twitter, X.
Hell yeah, we are.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're at OPT of the Will on Twitter/X.
I did want to interject with a potential resource, by the way.
Oh, okay.
There is a type of therapy. Y'all are probably familiar with DBT,
Mm.
but you might not be familiar with radical healing DBT. So the radical healing framework was developed by and for communities of color, and you know, for some leftists, there you might notice that with some kinds of therapy, it's very individualized, and a lot of therapy is developed for the individual, and especially like gosh, what word do I want to use here? I don't want to say waspy, but like a typical, with quotes, individual. So
I'm thinking
a lot of the times
suburbanite
here,
because of how isolated suburban houses are.
suburbanite,
Yeah, sorry, go on.
or yeah, it's just for a lot of people who are disabled, a lot of people who are members of a minority community. You'll have this experience where you'll go into therapy and it's like, this isn't for me. Like, it literally wasn't made with someone like me in mind. Um, and I suddenly forgot the name. Oh my God. Radical Healing DBT is made for minority communities, and the purpose is to talk with the individual and teach them about community and the benefits of community and what work they might be able to do, what kind of benefits they might be able. When I say work, I'm talking about like activism work, like
Mhm.
can you give certain kinds of support, emotional support, social support to people who are like you and support your community in that way?
Mhm.
Because being able to do that is incredibly enriching to an individual and can improve your mental health like very significantly. And that's coming from somebody who, like with my PTSD and disability, like my depression diagnosis, I'm still able to occasionally volunteer at my local LGBT community where I run a peer support group for transmasculine people. Um, and like, even showing up for that can be really hard sometimes when you have these disabilities. But every time I do it, I do feel a little bit better. Like I'm helping provide something that matters to people like me right now. Um, and I mean, there's just a lot of stuff you can do.
Hell
And
yeah.
there are a lot of people out there who want to help each other, Find people like you and find people who care about people like you, and like you'll suddenly find your life gets so much better.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Oliver. Radical Healing DBT is a thing to look up. Oh, also, if you do want to help the podcast with our iTunes issue, you can support us on Patreon. Patreon.com/. I actually don't remember what it is right now, but you'll just go to our Twitter. I'll link it there. Um, yeah. Wow, what a great episode. Thank you, Oliver. Oh, okay.
Thank
We
you.
we have our sign off. Well, we both had a thing we said at the end.
Oh, I say keep swagging it.
He says keep swagging it. I think I'm responsible for plugging the socials. Okay, keep swagging it. Keep keep it optimistic.
Hell yeah.
We'll keep workshopping it. Okay, and thank you everyone for listening to our podcast today.